Job Club. He recently wrote an article in Forbes about trends in employment for autistic people this year, 2021. He wrote that most of his adult autism group members in the Bay Area are out of work, furloughed, or laid off from jobs they had pre-pandemic. So Michael's going to dive into some of the reasons for why that may be and what he foresees in this coming year as far as employment trends. Hi, Michael. How are you?
Hi, Caroline. Good to be here.
Good to be here with you too. So would you first be able to explain a little bit about your background concerning this topic?
Yes. Caroline, I've actually been involved in the autism world now since 1990. I have a son who was diagnosed at that time. I should say at that time, if people knew about autism, they might know about Rain Man, the movie that came out previously in the previous year, but there was very little public consciousness of autism. There's been a sea change. Now I can't, whenever I mention the topic, people say I have a niece, nephew, neighbor, grandson. So a lot of people have a connection, if not a direct family member, some connection to autism, and it plays a much greater role in terms of public consciousness and even in terms of pop culture.
Absolutely. And we already have someone in the chat here saying that they are autistic themselves. So I'm glad that we already have some viewers. And for anyone who wants to submit questions for Michael, please feel free to do so in the chat. We'd love to answer them. Michael, I wanted to talk about your article and basically go through the trends that you're seeing right now. So your first point in the article is that autism employment initiatives with major employers, they continue to grow in number, but combined, they actually overall have a very small percentage of the autism adult population. So they're actually reaching a small number of people. Tell us a little bit about that and why that is.
Yes, Caroline. There really has been an explosion of autism employment initiatives, particularly in large firms over the past 5-6 years. At the same time, the number of people involved is tiny, really minuscule in terms of our adult autism community here in the United States. The most well-known of the autism programs is, well, really it's a consortium of firms under what's known as Autism at Work. First one was the large software company SAP, started the first Autism at Work program. Soon after, Microsoft, JP Morgan Chase, EY. There are about 20 of these large firms in the United States under this consortium of Autism at Work. And you read about them a lot, and they've developed a very effective model in terms of training, in terms of placement, and in terms of retention, most of all. But as you mentioned, combined, these 20 initiatives may have fewer than 800 people nationwide. So it's tiny. I'd say among other large firms, there are probably another 60 or 80 major initiatives. They probably have fewer than 1,500 people. So we have a lot of activity, a lot more, you know, in terms of the business press or just general press writing about these, but the numbers involved in these major firms remain very modest. And with mid-size and small firms, again, the numbers are modest. I would say we don't really have, it's one of my complaints, we don't really have a good handle on the autism employment rates or rates for adults with autism nationwide. You know, the usual, if you ask advocates or the major organizations like Autism Speaks, they talk about unemployment rates of 85% or at least 85% of our community not in a steady job. But we really don't know. My sense is that it's certainly above 2/3 who are not in a steady job of more than a few hours a week.
And I imagine that is really tough, obviously economically, but also, psychologically for folks. What do people in your group report about the impact of being unemployed during this time, and it being even harder to find a job if you do have autism?
Yes, well, my group is Ascend. That's the adult autism group of Northern California. It's a group of adults with autism, family members, and advocates. I stumbled on it in 2011, Caroline, when my son was graduating from Cal State East Bay, and we were looking for an adult group. As I say, I stumbled on it. It was in a small classroom in downtown in the old City College building downtown here. But as soon as I got in there, within 10 minutes, I thought to myself, after all these years, I finally come home. And people really get it there. People understand. You don't have to explain things. You don't have to go into details. People get it. They're all from the community. So I've been very active since, and continue to be very active with Ascend. And we have a job club. And most of our members are out of work now. They're bored. They want to go back. Right. They're not happy to, even those who are on unemployment insurance, which is only a portion. Right. But they want to get back. So nobody in our group, I would say, Carolyn, is satisfied with being told they should be happy with their benefits and not complain.
Absolutely. And I know that in many cases, benefits aren't even necessarily enough to cover the cost of living in the Bay Area. So there's that aspect too.
There's that aspect.
I would like to move on to your second point in the article, which is about universities, major nonprofits, and foundations have kind of been lagging behind the private sector when it comes to hiring autistic people. Even though you say with their missions, they should be at the lead, at the forefront. Why is this?
Well, it's disgraceful, in my view, just disgraceful. Universities in particular, some of which get tens of millions of dollars in terms of autism research, have done very little in terms of actual hiring. Large nonprofits whose mission it is to hire people with developmental or work with a range of people, including social services for adults with developmental differences, very little hiring. And so I think, it's an area that we really need to focus on. These are exactly the organizations that should be doing what they're telling other people to do, that is hire and retain people from the autism community.
Definitely. And what are the specific challenges that you find either from your research or from people talking to people in your group about getting and retaining a job if you are autistic?
Well, is the sort of the first principle of autism and employment, Caroline, is if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. Everyone's different in terms of skills and challenges, and abilities, and attitudes. So it's we're a very diverse community. I think the commonalities, though, have to do with a little bit in terms of getting the job and interviewing and going through the process and the executive skills needed to get a job, but even more so, I would say, retaining the job and certain behaviors. There are some what are known as comorbidities, neurological conditions that are connected to autism, like obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety disorder, and these sometimes undermine employment. And so it's the retention piece as well as getting the job that is such a challenge.
Absolutely. And I know the Bay Area is a more progressive place relative to other parts of the country. But talk to me a little bit about the stigma that comes with being hired and applying for a job as an autistic person, potentially. I'd love to talk about that, and then we can talk next about what you call also the autism talent advantage.
Yes. I don't know that there's such a stigma. I think employers are happy to, but it's a very, even before the pandemic, it's a very competitive labor market. And there are very few jobs here in the Bay Area that don't have, especially any decent job here in the Bay Area, that doesn't get tens of applicants. So part of it is just the competition in jobs. And, part of it is that employers have a certain view or a certain process of bringing people on, and that doesn't always work that well for our community.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for answering that. And I'm glad to hear that you believe that's the case as well. I think that's great. Let's talk about your next point, which is the quote unquote autism talent advantage, which has become a central concept in autism employment. But going forward, you say it needs to be defined far more broadly than just technical skills possessed by a small minority of people.
Yeah, back in 2015, 2016, there was a real push, what's known as autism talent advantage, that people on the spectrum had particular, technical skills or skills in technology. And so that's part of what drove some of the first Autism at Work programs at SAP and Microsoft, that people on the autism spectrum actually brought an advantage in terms of software skills and programming skills. And of course, what we found out is that's not the case at all. There's a portion of the population that has those skills. Maybe it's 10%, maybe it's 15%, but the great majority of our community don't have those skills. But they have other advantages, I think, they bring to jobs, and it's those advantages, whether it's ability to focus or loyalty or appreciation for the job or ability to handle certain sets of data, or just bringing a positive attitude to the job, in the workplace, that those attributes are far more prevalent, and that's what we've got to focus on, not just the technical skills. We focus on the technical skills, and it's going to be for a very small part of the population.
Absolutely. I think that's a really great and important point. And I'm curious if you know either any companies or any institutions that do focus on hiring autistic people, and maybe not specifically for technical skills.
Well, there are programs, the established training providers like ARC and Toolworks, and up in the Sacramento industry area, Pride Industries, have long been able to place people in facility setup jobs, setting up. And here in San Francisco, there are a number of companies, Salesforce, Twitter, some of the well-known companies that have employed our people in facility setup. But again, the number of these jobs have been very limited, and the hours have actually often been limited. So
that's interesting.
Yeah, no, it's not. There's there's so much more that can be done and should be done, and it's pulling teeth. I've been in this, as I say, in terms of job placement for our community, since 2011, and it's still, after all these years, pulling teeth to get any placement.
Absolutely. And that's interesting that you mentioned Pride Industries too, because I used to work at Lighthouse for the Blind in San Francisco, and I know they actually also hire a lot of blind people there. And Lighthouse for the Blind is such a cool and amazing building, which is fully accessible for people who are blind or who have low vision. And we talk about the design there. It's designed by this amazing blind architect, and it is fully accessible. You have a point in your article about the idea of an autism-friendly workplace, and you say that that should mean far more than lighting or sound modifications. When we talk about making a workplace accessible for people with autism, what does that mean, and how can we think and consider and talk about the definition of accessibility this way?
Well, as you say, often the description of autism-friendly workplace has to do with lighting and sound and isolation areas, but that's a tiny part in my experience, absolutely tiny. The workplace culture that needs to change has to deal more with patience and flexibility, and coming to this with not just looking for negative things, but recognizing the positive things that people in our community bring. And I think the cultural aspect is both the most important and clearly the most difficult. Any sort of consciousness change, so to speak, it's certainly, again, the most important, but also the most difficult. And it's something we've got to continue to, there's no government program that can do that. It's a process, I think, having to do with, we within the autism community itself, working within our firms and working with others, particularly in the human resources field.
Definitely. And thanks everyone who is commenting and asking questions here. If you have any questions for Michael, please feel free to ask. So Michael, I also wanted to ask about when we talk about a culture that is accommodating or accessible, what are some of the things that are important there in your view?
Well, I just draw on my experience. I've been a volunteer. I have been and continue to be just a volunteer job coach with people in our autism group in Ascend. And I would say, the key elements are, is the workplace willing to be patient while people may take time to learn skills? Are they willing to be flexible in terms of certain behaviors, whether it's talking to yourself, someone talking to themselves, or someone laughing to themselves or pointing things, or 100 different things.
Sure.
That may be behaviors that are unusual, and being willing to accept those, and again look toward more of the positive things people bring to the job.
Definitely. And I think also when we characterize certain behaviors as unusual, that also limits our thinking about how we can make everywhere more accessible for everyone. So I think that's an interesting point as well. And I wanted to talk about your last point before we move on to any other thoughts you have, Michael, on this topic, which is that you say right now this year, we are still learning about the importance of addressing comorbidities that have neurological ties to autism.
It's a big issue. And again, we're still learning about, there's so much we're learning about in terms of the neurology of autism. But what we've learned so far is that there are certain conditions, like, as I say, OCD and anxiety disorder and others, that are not exclusive to the autism community, but have neurological ties to autism. And often, when I talk about behaviors on the job, that often undermine employment. And it's those that, we've got to continue on an individual basis. Again, each person is different, but to try to address.
That makes total sense. I'm curious if you have anything that you think people should know on this topic. Maybe if people are watching and they are on the autism spectrum, maybe if they are an employer and they want to know how to be more accommodating and make their workplace perhaps more accessible, what advice do you have for those groups of people?
Yes. Let me start with people in our community who are looking for jobs.
Sure.
I think there are 3 key points. One, that as I say, just as a volunteer job coach, I start off with. One is you want to take advantage of the infrastructure of services that are available for free. So there's an infrastructure that does exist to provide job placement services, and some of it, it's uneven, but some of it is very good. I encourage everyone to sign up for the Department of Rehab, free service in terms of job placement. I encourage people to sign up for regional center, what's known as regional center, or Department of Developmental Services. Regional center services are a little bit harder to get if you don't sign up by the age 18, but not impossible. It requires a more significant developmental difference, but the services are there. They're for free, whether it's DOR or both. You can be both a DOR and regional center client. The services are there. We have a network of community groups like the ARC and ToolWorks here in the Bay Area, and in the East Bay Innovations, which is excellent. The important thing is don't do it alone. Do not, and I tell this to parents, I tell this to family members all the time, don't try to do it alone. There's this infrastructure that does exist, number one, and they know what they're doing in terms of placement, in terms of what are the incentives. We have a number of wage subsidy programs, especially for regional center clients. We have something here in California called the paid internship program that subsidizes 100%, 100% of wages. So there's an infrastructure out there. Two, I encourage people to, at Ascend, we have a job club, to try to connect with other organizations, voluntary organizations like Ascend and others, so that you're part of a broader group. We have a job club. There are others throughout the state. Again, you don't want to do it alone. You want to connect to the established infrastructure that provides services, and you also want to connect to other voluntary groups. And then the third is the obvious point. It's a very, very tough world out there in terms of jobs. And you can't get discouraged, and you've got to go in there saying, I'm going to apply for 50 jobs or 60 jobs or 80 jobs. My son graduated from Cal State East Bay 7 years ago, and he's worked in various positions relatively steadily. We've probably applied for maybe 30 jobs in city and state government, and he hasn't gotten any. I think he's looking for a more secure sort of safe harbor employment, and we'll keep looking. It may take another 7 years or more, but there's just no way of getting around. Maybe you're lucky the first time or second time or 10th time or 20th time, but it can often be a lengthy process.
Absolutely. And for people who are autistic, maybe they're not, who are unemployed right now, and they are just getting rejected from every job. Maybe they're not even hearing back from any jobs. What advice do you have for those folks?
Well, that's why I say it's not unusual, especially now, but even before the pandemic, it was true. Connect to DOR, to DDS, the two big state agencies serving adults on the autism spectrum, and local groups. Here in the Bay Area, there are 12 local groups that Pomeroy Center, ARC, ToolWorks, East Bay Innovations, that Best Buddies that provide placement, and that's true in Southern California, anywhere you go in the state.
Michael, I'd love to post all those resources on my page. So if you send me those, I'll be able to put them up so people can look at them after the broadcast if they're interested. Michael, sorry, what was that?
No, I said I'd be glad to.
Awesome. And do you have any closing thoughts or final wisdom for people who are watching who are autistic, who maybe they are looking for a job, maybe they've been out of a job for a while?
Well, again, I'd say connect with the infrastructure, connect with other volunteer groups. Do not do it alone. Try to do it alone. You don't need to, and it's going to be very hard to be successful. And reach out to others, and the mutual support, Caroline, is an important part of our community. And those would be the main advice. The other points are what are true of all seekers, utilize networks. I'm a big proponent of families getting involved. You know, there's a whole literature, Caroline, of criticizing helicopter parents and so forth. But those books are written by people who, you know, may not need it. For our community, I'm a helicopter parent, and in terms of getting involved in William's job search, and I encourage all other parents to do the same thing. Do whatever's possible, whatever network they have, to help to try to utilize that.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. I learned a lot during the stream. I hope people who are watching learned a lot too. Thank you so much, everyone who tuned in. Thank you so much, everyone who asked questions and commented. Really appreciate it. For those who want to stay abreast of Michael's work, do you have a website, Michael?
Or, well, I don't have a personal website. I don't have a personal website. We have our Ascend website, which I'd encourage everyone to go to and sign up to get our at least get our information. A lot we're doing. We used to have in-person meetings, of course, like everyone else. We've moved to Zoom. We have a job club. We have a television show. We have a variety of things we do, and it's all done by, especially the television show, all done by people on the autism spectrum, and that's www.ascend with 2 A's, AASCEND.org.
That's just awesome.
Google it.
That's really great, and I'll post the link as well. Thanks so much, everyone, and please follow me on HAPS, subscribe to me, and follow me on Twitter at Caroline, CAROLINE _heart, HART _. All right, thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. Hope everyone's having a good day. Talk to you later.
Bye,
Bye, Michael.